Okay, so stick with me for a second here. Imagine you're the captain of this just massive ship.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You've got cargo, you've got a crew, and obviously a destination, but the fog is just so thick you can't even see the bow of your own boat.
That is basically every business owner right now.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And to make matters worse, your old maps, they don't match the coastline anymore at all. The islands have moved, the currents have reversed, everything is different.
Which is a total nightmare scenario for any captain, or any CEO for that matter.
Exactly. Now, in that specific situation, would you refuse to turn on the radar just because you don't fully understand the physics of radio waves? Or would you use literally every single tool at your disposal to keep your ship off the rocks?
You use the radar. I mean, you absolutely use the radar. If you don't, you're just being negligent.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, our whole focus is about that radar. But the radar we are talking about isn't technology. It's astrology.
And we really need to clarify right out of the gate here that we're not talking about your daily horoscope in the back of the newspaper. We are talking about high-stakes business strategy, we're talking economic shifts, and a fundamental change in how human society operates.
Exactly. Look at your calendar. It is Saturday, February 28th, 2026. And if the sources we are covering today are correct, you are currently standing in this incredibly tight window of time that is rapidly closing.
Very rapidly.
We are diving into a really fascinating conversation today between two people. We've got Pim van Rieswyk, who is a hard-nosed business advisor and host of a program called the Springplank voor Vertrek. And we have Claire van Rieswyk, who's an astrologer and a speaker.
It's quite the pairing.
It really is. And their core message across this source material is pretty stark, actually. They are saying you have a fundamental choice to make in 2026, because by the time 2027 rolls around, it is simply too late.
It's a fascinating combination of worlds, isn't it? Because you have Pim, who is actively organizing this massive event for entrepreneurs called MVO 2026. And he's dealing with very grounded things, tax structures, and so-called Plan B strategies.
Right. Very nuts and bolts stuff.
And then you have Claire, who is bringing in planetary transits and cosmic weather. But the core argument of their discussion is that these aren't actually separate worlds at all. They argue that the external chaos we see in the economy right now is just a direct mirror of the energetic shifts happening in the stars.
So we have a massive amount of ground to cover today. We are going to unpack everything from this concept of the gift economy to the strategy of buying up unlivable land in Spain. And we'll even get into why your highly detailed Excel spreadsheets might actually be lying to you right now.
Which is going to terrify some of the accountants listening.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But we really have to start with this idea of the weather report, because that is the core analogy shaping this entire source material. Why are they talking about the weather when they are trying to talk about business strategy?
Well, think about how most people currently run a business, or even just how they run their personal household finances. You look at the news, you check the stock market, you look at your bank balance.
The tangible stuff?
Right, the physical evidence. That is essentially looking out the window to see what the weather is doing. But Claire's major point in the source is, what if it's completely foggy outside?
And I think we can all agree that right now, economically, politically, geopolitically, the fog is about as thick as it gets.
Exactly. You literally can't see the bow of your own ship. So if you're a captain in that heavy fog, do you just keep sailing at full speed based solely on what you can physically see with your own two eyes?
No, you'd crash immediately.
Right. You turn on the radar, you use instruments that are specifically designed to see through the fog.
And in this framework they're presenting, the radar is astrology.
Yes. And I want to be really clear about how the source frames this. Claire's not saying, oh, you're a Gemini, so you should avoid wearing a red shirt to your board meeting today.
All right. No pop astrology here.
Exactly. She is talking about astrology as a highly complex cyclical mapping system. It acts as a weather report. So if the report says a massive hurricane is currently forming in the Atlantic, that doesn't mean you are destined by fate to die. It just means you probably shouldn't sail your ship into the Atlantic this week.
So it preserves human agency. I think that's a really key distinction they make. It's not this fatalistic, predetermined thing. It's a strategic tool.
Precisely. If you know the wind's about to shift from north to south, you can proactively adjust your sails. If you don't know that, or if you refuse to look at the radar because you think it's unscientific or woo-woo, then the wind catches you off guard, it snaps your mast, and you just call it bad luck.
When it wasn't bad luck at all, it was just an unread weather report.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's actually look at the radar they are presenting. What exactly is it showing? Because according to Pim and Claire, we aren't just in a typical seasonal rainy period here. They are claiming we are looking at a fundamental cycle reset that humanity hasn't seen in 6,000 years.
Yes. This is where the heavy lifting of the astrological theory comes in. The source points to two massive planetary movements that are happening right now. First, we have Neptune and Saturn moving into the sign of Aries.
Okay, so for those of us listening who aren't completely fluent in star speak, we need to translate that. What does Neptune and Saturn moving into Aries actually mean for the real-world economy?
The best way to think of it is as a brand new canvas. So Aries is the very first sign of the zodiac. It represents the spark, the absolute beginning of a cycle.
Okay.
Then you have Neptune, which rules over dreams, the dissolution of boundaries, the ether. And you pair that with Saturn, which is the exact opposite. Saturn is structure, its rules, it's the cold, hard reality.
So dreams and reality hitting the starting line at the same time.
Exactly. When they hit Aries together, it is essentially like wiping the hard drive of society clean.
Wiping the hard drive, that's a big statement.
It is, and Claire points out a really sobering historical fact here. The last time this specific planetary configuration happened was 6,000 years ago.
6,000 years.
Think about that timeline. That predates the Bible. It predates the invention of cuneiform writing in Mesopotamia. We literally have zero recorded human history of what society looks like or how it functions under this specific energy.
That is honestly kind of terrifying, because it essentially means that all of our established playbooks are obsolete. Keynesian economics, modern democratic systems, the concept of the nation-state itself, all of it was built on a totally different operating system.
That's exactly the argument. We are flying without a manual right now. The old structures, the traditional ways of doing business, the old hierarchies, they were explicitly built for a different type of weather. And now the climate isn't just fluctuating, it is changing entirely. And the biggest driver of that change, the most significant shift she identifies, is the movement of Pluto into Aquarius.
Right. Pluto and Aquarius. I feel like I've heard this phrase buzzing around pop culture and social media lately, but the source really gets technical with it.
Yeah.
What is the actual mechanism here, according to Claire?
The central theme of Pluto in Aquarius is the shift from the pyramid to the circle.
The pyramid to the circle. Let's unpack that.
If you look at our world for the last few centuries, pretty much everything is structured as a pyramid. Look at the modern corporation. You have the CEO sitting at the very top, the management in the middle, and the workers at the broad bottom.
Right.
Look at government, the president or prime minister at the top, and the citizens at the bottom. The banking system has the central bank at the apex and the individual account holder at the bottom. It's all based on vertical power.
And the source aligns that vertical power with a specific energy, right?
Yes, she calls that Capricorn energy. It's all about structure, hierarchy, and top-down control.
And so Aquarius is what replaces that.
Exactly. Aquarius is inherently horizontal. It represents the network, the tribe, the circle. And the defining feature of a circle is that there is no top. Yeah. Power is naturally distributed. It is a completely decentralized model.
So just to put this in real-world terms, if I'm a CEO running a highly traditional top-down Fortune 500 company right now, this energy is basically coming from my head.
Metaphorically, yes, absolutely. And in some cases, maybe even literally, depending on how you've been operating. The source argues that top-down authority across the board is rapidly losing its legitimacy. And we can actually see this playing out everywhere right now. People just do not trust the official experts anymore. They don't trust mainstream media. They don't trust the government.
Who do they trust then?
They trust their peer-to-peer networks. They trust decentralized sources of information. That behavioral shift right there, that is the manifestation of Pluto in Aquarius.
It really explains the sheer chaos we are feeling in society, doesn't it? It's the intense friction between these massive legacy institutions desperately trying to maintain their vertical control and the general population trying to break away into horizontal networks.
That friction is exactly what defines this critical window of 2026. Claire describes it as the death rattle of the pyramid. In the source material, she explicitly mentions the fall of what she calls the toxic patriarchy.
And we should clarify her nuance there because it's important.
Yes, she is very careful here. She is not just broadly bashing men. She is critiquing a very specific type of energy. The yang energy that has become wildly out of balance. It's the energy of domination, of endless extraction of control through brute force.
The whole might makes right paradigm.
Precisely. That specific model of operating is what is actively collapsing under this astrological weather. And it is being actively challenged and replaced by the rise of feminine or yin energy, which is characterized by intuition, deep connection, and true collaboration.
You know, You mentioned losing your head a minute ago,
Hmm.
and there was a very specific, slightly ominous detail in the astrological breakdown about a star called Algol. Did you catch that part?
I did, and it's honestly the detail that makes you sit up straight in your chair. Algol has been historically known in astrological traditions as the demon star. It's closely associated with the myth of Medusa, which carries the literal and symbolic meaning of losing one's head.
Yikes. That doesn't sound like a gentle transition.
No, it's very forceful. In astrological terms, Algol is often linked to sudden unmasking. Claire notes that right now Uranus, which is the planet known for sudden shocking change and lightning strikes, is in a direct aspect with Algol. She predicts that this specific combination is going to lead to the literal and metaphorical dismantling of major public figures.
So we are talking massive public scandals then.
Scandals, yes, but it goes much deeper than just a PR crisis. It's about the revealing of deep-seated corruption. The core idea is that leaders who have been wearing a carefully constructed mask for years are going to have that mask violently ripped off. She describes this energy as a powerful catalyst. So if you've been operating your business or your government office from a place of hidden agendas or outright corruption, this Algol influence is going to expose it to the light. It's a grand unmasking of the elite class.
Which perfectly fits right back into that theme of the pyramid crumbling. Because if the people at the very top of the pyramid are exposed as frauds or criminals, the entire structure instantly loses its foundational legitimacy.
Exactly. The trust evaporates overnight. And Claire stresses that this isn't some vague long-term prediction for the next decade. She is talking about events happening right now in early 2026 and extending intensely into 2027. It's immediate. Absolute transparency is no longer just a nice-to-have corporate buzzword. According to this new weather, transparency is a mandatory survival mechanism.
Okay, so we have the cosmic weather report clearly mapped out. The top-down pyramid is crumbling, the fog of uncertainty is incredibly thick, and the old world leaders are metaphorically losing their heads. That naturally brings us to the economic reality of all this, because if the old way of doing business is dying, what actually replaces it? And this is where Pim and Claire get into this fascinating shift from what they call collecting coins to the gift economy.
This is undoubtedly the core economic thesis of the entire deep dive. They describe the old model of business using this great Dutch phrase, muntjes verzamelen, which translates to collecting coins.
I just love that specific image. People just blindly scrounging on the ground for little coins.
Right. But it's specifically about collecting coins purely for the sake of having more coins. It's profit maximization as the absolute singular goal of existence. Claire uses a very pointed word to describe this old economy. She calls it vampiric.
That's a very strong word to use for just regular capitalism.
It is a strong word, but she uses it deliberately. She describes the old economy as being entirely extraction-based. It's the act of taking resources, taking energy, taking labor, without ever genuinely giving back to the system. She links it to forms of modern slavery. She gives this really vivid example of building an oil pipeline through a pristine jungle. In the old vampiric model, you absolutely do not care about the health of the jungle or the indigenous people living there. You just want the oil so you can get the coins. The collateral damage is irrelevant to the spreadsheet.
And so what does the new model look like in contrast?
The new model is defined in the source as heart-led leadership. Now, I know before anyone rolls their eyes at how hoo-woo or soft that sounds, we really need to listen to the specific distinctions she makes. You still collect coins in the new model. The concept of money doesn't just magically disappear overnight, but the coins become a consequence of your actions rather than the primary goal.
Okay, so you do something genuinely valuable, and the money just naturally follows as a byproduct.
Essentially, yes. But the critical question is valuable to whom? That's the pivot point. In this new Pluto and Aquarius era, that horizontal circle model we talked about, true value is defined solely by what helps the tribe or the collective. Claire gives an example of creating a technological innovation that directly solves a painful problem for a local neighborhood collective. If you create a business that genuinely uplifts and helps your community, you will be financially rewarded by that community. But if your entire business model is just sitting in a boardroom asking, how can I extract the maximum amount of cash from these consumers today, then you will inevitably fail in this new energy.
Which perfectly leads us to their concept of the gift economy. Now, I have to admit, this concept both fascinates me and kind of scares me from a practical standpoint. Because on the surface, it sounds incredibly utopian. Like a hippie commune where nobody actually works hard and everyone just sits around hugging.
It definitely sounds that way at first glance. But what's interesting is that Claire is actually remarkably realistic about the inherent dangers of trying to build this. A true gift economy relies on the entire network actively keeping each other alive through voluntary exchange, not forced transaction. It's the mindset of, I have a surplus of oranges, you have a surplus of lemons, let's just trade. Or, I will help you physically build the roof on your house this weekend, and you can help me fix the engine in my truck next month.
Right. But she explicitly brings up a critical flaw in that system, right?
Right.
What happens when you encounter the freeloaders?
Yes, she directly addresses the freeloader problem, or as she frames it within her terminology, the vampire problem. She states very clearly that a functioning gift economy requires a remarkably high level of individual moral development. If you try to build this system, but you have people entering that inner circle who are still secretly operating with that old model mindset, the takers, the vampires, then the entire gift economy implodes from the inside out.
Because those people will just happily take all your oranges every week and literally never bring you a single lemon.
Exactly. The system gets drained. So a true gift economy requires radical honesty and extreme personal responsibility. It is absolutely not just a system of getting free stuff. It is based on reciprocal altruism. And she issues a pretty stark warning that right now in 2026, we are currently trapped in this painful transition phase. We have these two completely opposite worlds, the dying vampiric extraction economy and the fragile emerging gift economy, and they are awkwardly overlapping.
And that overlap is incredibly painful for people trying to navigate it. I think we need to dig into the why here for a second. Why would any rational business owner willingly choose to step into a theoretical gift economy when they could just stick with a guaranteed corporate paycheck in the extraction model?
Claire addresses that exact question by introducing the concept of timeline thinking. She points out that what she calls tribal consciousness naturally thinks 15 generations ahead. Think about that. 15 generations into the future. Whereas our current corporate economy, the vampire economy, typically thinks exactly 1 quarter ahead. The only question that matters is how do we hit our Q1 revenue targets to please the shareholders?
Right. It's just pure short-termism.
And it is a suicidal level of short-termism. Because if your only goal is this quarter's profits and you extract every single available resource to get it, you effectively milk the cow entirely dry, and then you die next quarter because there's nothing left. But the new energetic canvas of Neptune and Aries is forcefully demanding that we look at the very start of a long cycle. When you're planting a new forest, you absolutely do not expect to sell the lumber tomorrow morning. You are planting it for your grandchildren.
So for the pragmatic business owners listening to us right now, maybe the required pivot isn't to suddenly stop charging money for your services. Maybe the actual pivot is just to stop endlessly optimizing your entire operation for next week's profit margin.
That is a brilliant and highly practical application of the source material. It's about shifting your operational timeline. If you run your company with the genuine intention that it needs to sustainably support your great-grandchildren, you will naturally begin to treat your current employees entirely differently. You will treat your customers differently. You organically stop being vampiric because a vampire eventually eats its entire food source until it starves to death in an empty town. But a good farmer obsessively nurtures the soil so it keeps producing year after year.
That brings up a metaphor that Pim, the host of the original conversation, uses to describe the current state of the average citizen. He brings up this very vivid, very Dutch metaphor of the milk cow, the milk cow.
It's such a visceral and relatable image. You picture the cow just standing completely passively in the fenced-in meadow. It gets milked every single day. It grazes a little bit and then it gets milked again. It has absolutely zero agency over its own existence. Pim uses this imagery to perfectly describe the deep frustration of the modern entrepreneur or even just the everyday citizen trapped in the current system. You work incredibly hard every day, and then the state or the corporate system aggressively milks you through exorbitant taxes, endless bureaucratic regulations, and creeping inflation.
And the cow just stands there and takes it.
Right, until the cow finally realizes it actually has a choice in the matter. This realization is the core of the choose or lose moment they're emphasizing for 2026. Pim says, look, you can either stand in the middle of the field and endlessly complain to the other cows that you're being milked too much, or you can finally decide to just jump the fence.
But jumping the fence is genuinely scary. I mean, there might be wolves out there in the forest, or there might just be absolutely no grass to eat on the other side. The safety of the meadow is a known quantity, even if it hurts.
That is entirely true, and it's a valid fear. But the profound point the source is making here is that choosing to stay in the meadow and be milked is also an act of choice. We have this tendency to think of our own passivity as just accepting the way things are. But Pym and Claire are actively reframing that passivity as a voluntary agreement to remain a victim. And they argue strongly that here in 2026, the figurative fence is actually lower than it has ever been in modern history. But simultaneously, the farmer is getting significantly more aggressive with the milking machine. So you are being forced to make a move.
This actually brings us to a really nuanced and fascinating part of their conversation, because it's all about the specific mindset required to successfully jump that fence. They draw a very sharp line between being what they call wakker, which translates to awake, and being bewusst, which translates to conscious. Now, before reading the source material, I would have honestly thought those two words were just interchangeable synonyms.
Most people do use them interchangeably, but within the context of this specific philosophical framework, they are literally worlds apart. And grasping this specific distinction is absolutely crucial for anyone who is currently feeling angry or frustrated with the state of the world.
Okay, let's break that down then. How does the source define being awake?
Being awake, according to Claire and Pym's definition, is essentially the process of realizing that the mainstream system is rigged. It describes the person who has finally gone down the rabbit hole. They know all about the World Economic Forum. They research the Bilderberg meetings. They are highly skeptical of the official government narratives around massive events like the corona pandemic. They clearly see the systemic corruption.
Okay, so in internet parlance, they have taken the red pill. They see the matrix.
Exactly. They see the matrix. But and this is a massive relation. But Claire acutely points out that people who are merely awake are very often still operating entirely from their ego. They are incredibly angry at the system. They constantly judge the people around them who are still asleep. They adopt this attitude of, look at all those ignorant sheeple, I am so much smarter and more enlightened than they are. They ultimately feel a deep sense of superiority.
Right. It's that very specific vibe of, I didn't comply with the mandate, so I am fundamentally better and stronger than you.
Yes, and Claire's argument is that this mindset is still a massive trap because it is still fundamentally based on the concept of separation. It is still an us versus them mentality. So you haven't actually escaped the old world pyramid at all. You are just desperately trying to place yourself at the very top of a brand new moral pyramid. You are still playing the exact same vertical game.
Wow, that is a really sharp critique. So if that is awake, then what does it mean to be conscious?
To be conscious in her framework is about a deep remembering of who you actually are on a soul level. She says it is firmly anchored in what she refers to as the law of one. It is the profound realization that there is actually no fundamental separation between any of us.
So it's the ultimate realization of I am you and you are me.
Precisely. She actually brings in this beautiful Filipino cultural concept called kapwa to illustrate this. Kapwa roughly translates to the shared self or shared identity. The core ethic is that if I intentionally hurt you, I am quite literally inflicting harm on myself. If I harshly judge you for being asleep to the corruption of the world, I am ultimately just judging a fragmented part of my own self.
She used a really fantastic analogy for this in the source material, didn't she? The one about the building.
The penthouse and the first floor metaphor. Yes, it's brilliant. She asks us to imagine that human consciousness is a tall apartment building. The person living up in the penthouse, representing the conscious individual, has this incredible vantage point. They can look out and see the entire city. They can see the distant horizon. They can clearly see the storm weather rolling in from miles away. But importantly, they can also easily look straight down and see the street level.
And the person living down on the first floor.
The person on the first floor can only see the immediate street in front of them. Their vision is entirely blocked by the surrounding buildings. They physically cannot see the panoramic view from the penthouse. Now, here is where the moral responsibility kicks in, according to Claire. The person standing up in the penthouse has obviously been on the first floor before on their way up. They know exactly what it looks and feels like down there. So they absolutely shouldn't mock or belittle the person on the first floor for not being able to see the incoming storm. Instead, they should respond with deep compassion.
That is just such a powerful psychological reframing. Instead of getting furious at your friends or family who just don't get what's happening in the world, you realize that they literally cannot see the view from where they are currently standing.
Precisely. And if we pull this back to a business context, it dictates a massive shift in how you operate. It means moving away from a highly competitive, arrogant stance of, I know the market better than you do, and replacing it with a compassionate, collaborative stance of, how can we build a system that lifts everyone up to the penthouse view? that compassion is the actual living essence of the Pluto in Aquarius shift. It's about genuine horizontal connection, not vertical judgment.
Okay, but let's play devil's advocate and get really grounded for a second here, because we're ultimately talking about people trying to run profitable businesses. How do you practically run a company based on cosmic compassion and universal oneness when you have brutal overhead costs and payroll to meet by Friday? Pim actually told a very specific story about a couple he advised that perfectly highlighted this exact struggle between the old hard logic and this new intuitive way.
Yes, the story of the husband and wife who came to him seeking structural financial advice. It serves as the perfect case study for this entire transition. According to Pim, the husband was operating almost entirely from what they call ratio, pure logic, the head. He showed up armed with complex Excel sheets. He had prepared 25 highly specific analytical questions. He desperately wanted to mathematically calculate every possible pro and con of leveraging the equity in their home.
Which honestly, to 99% of the business world, just sounds like being a highly responsible, prudent adult.
In the old Capricorn world, absolutely yes. That is exactly how you were taught to succeed. But then Pim looks at the wife. And the wife was operating entirely from intuition, from feeling. She told Pim that she could literally feel the movement of the world shifting. She knew exactly what major financial move they needed to make, and she knew it without looking at a single cell on that spreadsheet.
And in a traditional boardroom setting, we would almost certainly say that the husband is being the sensible protector and the wife is being dangerously reckless with their finances.
But Pim and Claire completely flipped that script in their analysis. They argue that the husband's reliance on ratio was actually just a sophisticated psychological defense mechanism to mask his deep fear. He was terrified of the changing economy, so he was desperately trying to control the inherently uncontrollable by using spreadsheets. But in a highly chaotic, rapidly shifting environment, that thick fog we talked about at the beginning, pure logic actually fails you because the underlying variables are changing far faster than you can calculate them.
Right, if the map itself is fundamentally wrong, then calculating your exact route with mathematical precision doesn't help you at all. It just gets you lost more efficiently.
That's a great way to put it. Claire argues fiercely that in this new Aquarius energy, you absolutely must begin to use yin energy, feminine intuition, to successfully navigate. You have to learn how to feel the path beneath your feet. Pim's conclusion was that the husband needed to physically lean back in his chair, put down the spreadsheet, and actually listen to his wife. Not simply because she is a woman, but because she was actively accessing a totally different data set. She was tapped into her intuition, which was picking up signals that his Excel sheet couldn't possibly capture.
It's fascinating because Pim, who's this very successful hard numbers business advisor, openly admitted during the conversation that he now uses AI tools like ChatGPT to handle all the logical grunt work, but he sets his entire high-level strategic course based purely on intuition that he gets during long walks in the woods.
Right. He literally says in the source, I don't think it, I know it. That refers to an inner knowing that bypasses the analytical brain. They are forcefully suggesting that intuition is quite literally the new business logic of 2026.
Okay, so we have laid out the grand theory. You need to trust your gut, you need to operate with compassion, and you really need to stop being a corporate vampire. But what does this actually look like when rubber meets the road? Pim actually has a highly specific, tangible plan B that he is actively pitching to people. And it heavily involves moving to Spain.
It does, but not just anywhere in Spain. It specifically involves the remote parts of Spain that absolutely nobody else wants to live in.
Right. He called them the Orange Vrijstaten, the Orange Free States, which honestly sounds a little bit colonial, doesn't it?
The name definitely evokes a very specific era of Dutch history, which might raise some eyebrows, but the underlying concept he's proposing is entirely about modern survival and radical autonomy. Pim is looking deeply at the interior regions of Spain, generally about 100 kilometers inland from the coast.
Yeah.
He points out the demographic reality there. Everyone wants to live on the beautiful beaches or in the major modern cities. So the interior of the country is completely emptying out. The younger locals are all leaving for the cities.
He actually referred to it as unlivable land.
That's right.
Unlivable in the current traditional real estate market sense. It essentially has zero commercial value because there is no existing corporate infrastructure and no one actively wants to be there. But Pim says this is exactly where the alchemy has to happen.
Alchemy. That's an interesting word choice. What does he mean by that?
Historically, alchemy is the magical process of creating gold out of worthless lead. In this real estate context, Pim is talking about creating massive tangible value out of literal dirt. He argues that if you go in and buy up this completely abandoned dirt cheap land, He specifically mentions prices as low as €1 per square meter. And you manage to bring a network of 100 conscious people there with you. You have instantly and miraculously created immense value.
Because it's the human beings that actually generate the value, not the dirt itself.
Exactly. The intentional community is the value.
Yeah.
Suddenly, that empty, barren field has a highly skilled network of people who are actively trading services, growing their own food, building sustainable houses. You've essentially manifested a functioning microeconomy out of thin air. It really is the ultimate expression of entrepreneurship when you think about it. The old world business model is entirely focused on fighting tooth and nail for tiny fractions of market share in an already hypercrowded room. It's the classic red ocean strategy. But Pym is essentially suggesting a radical blue ocean strategy, or I guess in this case a dry earth strategy. Go exactly where no one else is. The inherent value isn't buried in the Spanish soil. The value is entirely contained within the specific energy and the network that you bring to the soil.
And that concept right there is the absolute textbook definition of Pluto in Aquarius. Power inherently returning to the people. Power to the creator. The top-down centralized authority, whether that's the corporate landlord, the central bank, or the state, completely loses its leverage and relevance the moment the people collectively realize that they are the actual engines of value generation.
But while we're talking about bringing groups of people together, we really need to highlight that Pym was incredibly specific about the difference between building a commune versus building a community. And he seemed pretty violently allergic to one of those concepts.
Yes, he was. Pym is definitely not what you would call a commune guy. He describes the traditional commune setup as a place of forced, mandated sharing. He paints this picture of everyone being forced to do the dishes together every single night or having to endure a grueling 3-hour consensus meeting just to decide what type of apple tree to plant in the yard. He absolutely hates that dynamic. He literally calls it an allergic reaction.
And I think a huge portion of our listeners can totally relate to that reaction. The romantic idea of living off the grid is great, but the reality of losing all your personal privacy and autonomy to groupthink is terrifying.
Exactly, which is why he strongly proposes the community model instead. The foundation of the community model is highly autonomous individuals. In his vision, everyone owns their own physical house, they own their own plot of land, they have their own literal fence. He relies heavily on the old adage that good fences make good neighbors. But the key is that you are geographically close enough to seamlessly engage in that gift economy we discussed earlier. You are close enough to walk over and help if your neighbor falls ill or gets injured. You are close enough to gather and celebrate holidays together. But crucially, you are not contractually forced to be in each other's space every single second of the day.
So it's the perfect blend of autonomy plus connection, which again feels like that Pluto and Aquarius sweet spot they keep going back to.
It really is. It represents the horizontal circle of sovereign individuals rather than the amorphous, enmeshed blob of a commune or the rigid vertical pyramid of a corporation.
And Pym emphasizes repeatedly that building these communities isn't just some whimsical early retirement fantasy for wealthy expats. He frames it as a hard, necessary survival strategy, perfectly aligned with the ticking clock of 2026 and 2027.
We really need to look closely at that specific timeline again because they do not mince words about it. The source clearly labels 2026 as the year of the choice. It is presented as the very last viable off-ramp to jump trains. If you truly want to transition your life and your business from the vampiric extraction economy into the sustainable gift economy, or if you need to move your decision-making from the logical head to the intuitive heart, you absolutely must initiate that shift right now in 2026. Because then we hit 2027. And 2027 is unequivocally labeled as the year of justice.
Justice. That sounds incredibly final, and honestly, a bit threatening.
It is meant to be a wake-up call. To explain the energy of 2027, Claire explicitly references the Justice card from the tarot deck, and she ties it to the old Germanic fairy tale of Frau Holly or Mother Hulda.
I am not super familiar with that fairy tale. How does it connect to the economic forecast?
In the story, you have two girls who fall down a well into another world. The girl who works diligently with a pure good heart is eventually rewarded by Frau Holly by being completely showered in pure gold. But the girl who is lazy, selfish, and operates from ego is punished by being covered head to toe in black, pitch-sticky tar that she can never, ever wash off.
So basically they are saying that 2027 is cosmic payday.
Or a very severe day of reckoning, depending on where you stand. The source heavily suggests that if you stubbornly refuse to adapt and you are still aggressively clinging to the old dying structures operating from pure ego engaging in extraction and deception, by the time 2027 arrives, you will face, quote, severe difficulties or you will simply go down with the ship. The overarching astrological energy simply will not mathematically or energetically support the old vampiric business model anymore. They describe it as a literal split in reality.
A split in reality. That sounds very sci-fi. What exactly do they mean by that?
They frequently use the terminology of 3D and 5D dimensions coexisting simultaneously. While it does sound like something out of a science fiction movie, what they're practically describing is a psychological and energetic divergence. They mean that two completely different entrepreneurs can be living in the exact same city, running businesses in the exact same country, but they will begin to experience entirely different objective realities. The person clinging to the old ways will experience a reality of intense fear, profound scarcity, and endless systemic friction. That is the 3D experience. Meanwhile, the person who made the jump will experience a reality defined by serendipitous connection, intuitive flow, and sustainable abundance. That is the 5D experience.
And importantly, you don't necessarily have to physically buy a plot of dirt in Spain to enter that 5D reality, right?
No, not necessarily. Claire is very explicit on this point. She says you absolutely do not have to physically emigrate or leave your home country, but you absolutely must leave the old system mentally and structurally. You can choose to stay right where you are in the Netherlands or the US or wherever, but you have to completely unplug your internal sense of security and your self-worth from the crumbling vertical pyramid.
Though, to be fair to the source material, Pim would definitely prefer that you buy a ticket to his event and eventually buy some land in Spain.
Oh, well, of course. Pim is a pragmatic businessman at the end of the day, and he is actively organizing this massive in-person event to help facilitate these exact moves, MVO 2026.
Right, the master class for entrepreneurs happening on June 12th in Newgad. He really pitched this as much more than just a standard business networking event. He called it a gathering of the tribe.
Yes, he draws this incredibly bold comparison. He says, essentially, where the old world elite gathered to plot the future in Davos, we, the new conscious entrepreneurs, are gathering at MVO. He says they are expecting 2,500 awake entrepreneurs to show up, along with 24 different speakers. He frames the event not just as an educational seminar, but as a literal physical manifestation of this new horizontal network they have been describing. It's designed to be the exact place where you go to actively find the specific people you might eventually build that Spanish community with.
You know, looking at the whole picture, it really is fascinating how seamlessly they blend the highly spiritual with the incredibly tactical in this conversation. On one side, you have Claire intensely discussing cosmic DNA lines and the rise of Christ consciousness, and on the exact same stage, you have Pim talking about optimizing offshore tax structures and legally registering land deeds.
But honestly, that integration is the entire point of their message, isn't it? That is the real revelation of this deep dive. For our entire lives, we have been thoroughly conditioned to keep these concepts in
So as we look to wrap this up and bring all these massive concepts back down to the individual listener, again, it is February 28th, 2026. The outside world looks incredibly chaotic right now. Global inflation is stubbornly high. Legacy institutions are cracking. Traditional leaders are acting increasingly erratic or quite literally losing their heads, just as the algal transit predicted. What is the ultimate actionable takeaway from this source material?
The single biggest takeaway is that remaining passive is now the most dangerous choice you can make. The cosmic weather report has been clearly broadcast. The prevailing wind that has driven society for centuries has fundamentally changed direction. If you are sitting in your office right now just passively waiting for the economy to finally, quote, go back to normal, you are waiting for a world that simply no longer exists. The 6,000-year cycle has permanently turned over. The hard drive is wiped.
You essentially have to make a definitive choice.
You have to choose. You have to ask yourself the hard questions today. Are you currently operating your life and your business from a place of deep fear and rigid logic? Are you the husband clinging desperately to the Excel sheet as the ship sinks? Or are you actively cultivating your intuition and seeking genuine connection, like the wife who feels the subtle shifts in the current? Are you just going to stand complacently in the meadow waiting for the taxman to milk you again tomorrow morning? Or are you actively scanning the perimeter looking for the lowest point in the fence so you can jump?
And I think it's vital to remember that jumping the fence doesn't mean you have to wander into the dark forest entirely alone. The entire underlying promise of this new Aquarius energy is that there is a massive decentralized network of other people already standing on the other side of that fence, just waiting to trade their oranges for your lemons.
Exactly right. The long, isolated era of the cutthroat lone wolf entrepreneur is definitively over. The era of the collaborative tribe has officially begun.
It is a massive amount of information and shifting paradigms to process. But if there's just one single image from this material that listeners should hold on to, I really think it's Claire's image of the penthouse. Whatever you are building right now, try to elevate your perspective to that higher floor. Not so you can arrogantly look down on everyone else who is still struggling on the street level, but so you can clearly see exactly where the real storm is coming from and you can navigate yourself and your community through it with genuine compassion.
Absolutely. And practically speaking, maybe take a moment to quietly check your own internal intuitive radar before you blindly open your financial spreadsheets tomorrow morning.
You know, here is where this whole deep dive gets really profound for me. There was one specific quote from Pim that just embedded itself in my brain. He said, "Not choosing is also a choice." That is the provocative thought I want to leave you with today. If this cosmic weather report is even partially accurate, and the foundational wind of human society is actively changing direction for the very first time in 6,000 years, are you really going to exhaust yourself trying to sail your ship against it, using torn maps drawn by people who aren't even in charge anymore?
That truly is the defining question of 2026.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. Check your astrological charts, check your hearts, and we will see you in the next one.
Safe sailing out there, everyone.